Hi, I'm Dr. Dave Janda. Welcome back to a special edition of the WTF Show. This special edition is going to focus on General Flynn and the ongoing case he has and battle he's doing with the deep state. A couple things we need to do. We need to set a timeline because the bought-off lamestream fake media tentacle of the deep state is not reporting on what's really occurring with this case or how it's adversely affecting you, me, every American citizen. General Flynn, his very courageous family, his fantastic attorney, Sidney Powell, are fighting for not just General Flynn's freedom, for every American's freedom, for the rule of law, for the Constitution, for due process, for the future of our country. It's that simple. And when you get to know the particulars which the bought-off lamestream fake media is hiding from you, this is going to make you sick. Just as the contents of the Inspector General's report from the Department of Justice about the FISA abuse should make every American sick, so should the details when it comes to General Flynn's case. There are some recent developments that occurred this week, and that's why I want to do this special report. Because the fake media, the lamestream, bought-off media won't touch on any of this. Let's set a timeline to set the foundation of our discussion. On January 22nd, 2017, General Flynn was sworn in as National Security Advisor to President Donald Trump. 2 days later, in his office, an ambush interview occurred by the FBI. When I say ambush, that's not hyperbole. In fact, Comey even described it as an ambush interview, to send two agents, Strzok and Patinka, into Flynn's office on January 24th, 2017, when the Office of General Counsel in the White House wasn't even set up, to get in there and essentially entrap him. The deep state did not want and feared General Flynn as National Security Advisor because he knew where all the bodies were buried. Remember, he was the one who came forward about the Obama administration weaponizing ISIS. He was the one who testified in front of a congressional committee about a reallocation of resources in the intelligence community and in the military. He was affecting the deep state's ever so important pocketbooks. And they needed to get rid of him. And that's what this is about. January 24, 2017, they interview him. And the FBI, when they interview someone, fills out 302 forms. They have 5 days to file that in their Sentinel system. Did they do that with General Flynn? Well, apparently the original 302 is lost. Right. You can't lose something in the Sentinel system. They refused to turn it over, the prosecutors from the government. But over time, they produced 4 more 302s. February 10th, February 11th, February 14th, February 15th, 2017. 5 302 forms, one of which is missing. And every one of those different 302s has been edited. It came out in October 2019 through the diligent work of Sidney Powell, General Flynn's current fantastic attorney, that Lisa Page and Andrew McCabe actually edited the 302s. And remember, the 302s are the foundation of what General Flynn was prosecuted on, that he lied to the FBI. He didn't lie to the FBI. The 302s were changed to make it look like he lied. And Sidney Powell presented that information and evidence. She's the one who dug that up. The prosecutors were actually forced to turn it over because it so happens that some more Strzok Page texts were declassified through the Department of Justice. You can thank William Barr probably for that one. And that just occurred in October 2019. General Flynn initially was represented by a firm called Covington. One of their partners is Eric Holder, former Attorney General under Barack Obama. That's right, the same Eric Holder who was integrally involved in the Fast and Furious scandal, where taxpayer funds were used to buy weapons from Mexican drug lords and drug cartels. That's what Fast and Furious was about. Hundreds of Mexicans south of the border died because of that operation run by Obama and Holder. The plan was to generate enough negative spin about guns and killings that maybe they could get some gun legislation through. Brian Terry, U.S. border agent, died as well. Yeah, that Eric Holder. Sidney Powell has made it very clear that General Powell was not represented well by his former attorneys, and in fact, General Flynn fired those attorneys in June of 2019 when Sidney Powell came on. She also made it clear that when General Flynn pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI, one count, on November 30th, 2017, he did so under being coerced, that if he didn't sign the plea agreement of something that he was innocent for, that his son, his family, could well face prosecution. Sounds like something out of Stalin's Soviet Union or Mao's China or East Germany before the wall fell, something the Stasi would pull. No, it was pulled right here in the United States. Right here. Prior to his plea of guilt that he signed, I believe, under duress because he was being coerced because of the potential for his son to be prosecuted. And lest you think you have to do something wrong to be prosecuted or illegal, apparently not in this day and age. They can just make it up. Just look at that IG report. His attorneys, who were partners with Eric Holder at the time, were told that, well, there is some information that you should be aware of that, well, Strzok and Patinka, who interviewed General Flynn on the 24th, they actually, they're not quite sure he lied. In fact, they don't think he lied. They think he was being forthright, truthful. And, there's some other texts out there that show that they weren't really playing quite fair. And you can tell that to your client, but if he doesn't sign that plea agreement, well, we might go after him on some foreign agent charges and his kid and who knows who else in his family. That's why he signed the guilty plea, to protect his family. The next day, December 1st, 2017, he went in front of Judge Contreras, and that's when the guilty plea was entered. 6 days later, December 7th, 2017, Contreras stepped away. No one has ever put forward why he stepped away. Case was handed to Judge Sullivan. On December 7, 2017. On February 16, 2018, the court ordered that exculpatory information be presented to the judge. On December 18th, 2018, a year ago, General Flynn went in front of Judge Sullivan for sentencing. Amazing that it took a year for the sentencing hearing to occur. It's very long. Every prosecutor I've spoken to said that is beyond unusual. And in fact, there are a couple things that transpired at that sentencing hearing. At one point, Judge Sullivan went off the rails and talked about General Flynn working with the country of Turkey and possibly being a traitor. And then he took a break and came back and apologized to General Flynn that he was wrong, that he was given some apparently bad information. Yeah, bad information. You slandered the guy? You defamed the guy? In open court? The judge did? He isn't a traitor, he's a patriot. There was no FARA case against him. In fact, the Covington lawyers are the ones who filled out the foreign agent forms, and if there was any problem with them, it's those attorneys that should have been on the hook if there were problems with the forms, not General Flynn. But Judge Sullivan, after he kind of came back, went off the rails and came back on the rails, said to General Flynn, I'm looking at some of this information and it doesn't add up. Do you still want to hold your guilty plea? Or do you want to pull it back? Well, if he pulled it back, those same prosecutors that were sitting at the table next to him would have gone after his kid and family. So Flynn said, no, I'll stay with where I'm at. And then the judge said, well, I think this is something that you better think about for a while. And adjourned court. In June of 2019, Sidney Powell was brought on, reviewed the records for several months, and realized there are huge problems here. On August 30th of 2019 and October 15th of 2019, motions to compel and then the replies were filed by Sidney Powell. Filed the motion to compel, the prosecutors filed a response, and she filed what's called a sur reply, or a response to the prosecutors. And then in November, Judge Sullivan issued, when they was going to decide on the motion to compel, he said, well, I want to see what the IG report says. And then on December 16th, 2019, he ruled that the motion to compel, and the motion to compel was Sidney Powell asking for all the exculpatory evidence, all the evidence called Brady material that showed that General Flynn was in fact an innocent man that the prosecutors were holding and did not share with General Flynn's defense team, both prior and current, to be handed over. And Judge Sullivan denied that motion. Why? It's a great question. Why? When you boil it all down, and we'll get to this in a minute, what Judge Sullivan said is, well, General Flynn, because you pled guilty in December of 2017, and because when I asked you in December of 2018 if you still wanted to have that guilty plea, because Judge Sullivan, had some real big questions about what happened with the prosecution on this, and what the fact that the FBI agents who interviewed you said you didn't lie, but yet the charges that you lied, this isn't adding up. And the fact that you didn't pull back that guilty plea, well, you see, when you plead guilty, this is what Sullivan said, you lose your Fourth Amendment rights, you lose your constitutional rights, and therefore lose the opportunity to gain that information that the government's holding that shows you're innocent. I kid you not. This is the same judge, Judge Sullivan, that in 2009 was involved in the Ted Stevens case. And I've talked about this in the past. Look at our previous videos, but brief review. In April 7, 2009, a federal judge exonerated former Alaska Senator Ted Stevens, dismissing the corruption conviction that cost the veteran senator his seat, and launching an investigation into prosecutorial missteps that plagued one of the most high-profile public corruption trials in history. The ruling comes 6 days after the U.S. Justice Department admitted its attorneys had withheld potentially exculpatory evidence from Stevens' attorneys and asked Judge Emmett Sullivan to throw out the conviction. Quote, "In nearly 25 years on the bench, I've never seen anything approaching the mishandling and misconduct that I've seen in this case," end quote. Well, maybe that was true in 2009, but it happened again in 2019. You see, the Department of Justice came forward in 2009 and said, you know what? And I believe, and as I understand it, it was a prosecutor in the team that came forward and said, look, we withheld stuff, okay? And it showed his innocence. This is wrong. One of the prosecuting folks came forward and said that. Kind of forced Sullivan's hand. This time, none of the people that are involved in the prosecution of General Flynn came forward, at least yet, and said that. And Sullivan ruled. Remember, we just had the Inspector General release a report, and in particular, the FBI was decimated in that report, as was the Department of Justice. And just one little statement in that, quote, "Ineffective management and oversight of confidential sources can result in jeopardizing FBI operations and placing FBI agents, sources, subjects of investigation, such as General Flynn, and the public, you and me, in harm's way," end quote. Yeah, that's the FBI. Conservative Treehouse stated the following: "The entire FBI case against Flynn, meaning the central element that he lied to the FBI's investigators, which he did not do, is predicated on the 302 interviews report generated by the two FBI agents, later discovered to have been edited, shaped, and approved by Andrew McCabe and Lisa Page. And for almost 2 years, the entire outline of their documented evidence has been misattributed. Obviously, what triggered this re-review of the notes was a smart sir reply from defense, Sidney Powell, that highlighted how Peter Strzok's notes, well, were actually Patinka's, and Patinka's were actually Strzok's. And in fact, they had been edited by people that weren't even in the room. This from Monday night, December 16, 2019, regarding Judge Sullivan's decision. This from Peter Svab at the Epoch Times. Judge denies Flynn's request for exculpatory information and case dismissal. A federal judge has denied request by Lieutenant General Michael Flynn to prompt the government to give him information he deems exculpatory and dismiss the case against him. District Court Judge Emmett Sullivan sided with the government in arguing that Flynn was already given all the information to which he was entitled. The judge also dismissed Flynn's allegations of government misconduct, noting that Flynn, this is the key, already pleaded guilty to his crime and failed to, in 2017, and failed to raise his objections earlier at the 2018 hearing, when some of the issues he now complains about were brought to his attention and to his previous attorney's attention. Quote, "The sworn statements of Mr. Flynn and his former counsel belie his new claims of innocence and his new assertions that he was pressured into pleading guilty," end quote. Flynn, the former head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, pleaded guilty on November 30th, 2017 to one count of lying to the FBI. In June, he fired his lawyers, June 2019, and hired former federal prosecutor Sidney Powell, who has since accused the government of misconduct, particularly of withholding exculpatory information or providing it late. Powell also said the government had no proper reason to investigate Flynn in the first place and that it had set up an ambush interview, January 24th, 2017, with the intention of making Flynn say something it could allege was false. Sullivan disagreed and said that previously, with the advice of his former lawyers, Eric Holder's buddies and partners, Flynn never, quote, challenged the conditions of the FBI interview. Could that have been because he was being coerced that if he did, his son would be prosecuted? I believe it does. Flynn was interviewed by two FBI agents, Joe Patinkin and Peter Strzok, on January 24, 2017, 2 days after he was sworn in as Donald Trump's national security advisor. The prosecutors argued that the FBI had a sufficient and appropriate basis for the interview because Flynn, days earlier, told members of the Trump campaign, including soon-to-be Vice President Mike Pence, that he didn't discuss the Russian ambassador, the expulsion of Russian diplomats in late December 2016 by then-President Barack Obama. Flynn later admitted in his statement of offense that he asked via Russian ambassador to the U.S. Sergei Kislyak for Russia to not only respond to the sanctions in a reciprocal manner and not to escalate the situation. In other words, General Flynn was also named the designee at that time, in December 2016. Donald Trump had won election in November 2016. General Flynn had been nominated for National Security Advisor. He was sworn in on January 22nd, 2017. In the interim, he was the acting National Security Director, essentially. And when Obama tried to bait Russia into a war in Syria by all these sanctions and all this other stuff, Flynn, as the newly designated National Security Advisor, which is very normal and has happened in every administration since Kingdom Come, that has been since the United States of America has been here, and the National Security Advisor position has been in place, contacted a number of world leaders, one of which was Kislyak. And in Kislyak said, don't take Obama's bait. Don't start World War III. Okay? General Flynn, along with several others, prevented a war from occurring that Obama was trying to bait Russia into. That's the bottom line. The FBI was at the time investigating whether Trump campaign aides coordinated with Russian 2016 election meddling. Okay, the FBI was investigating what happened before the election. This conversation with Kislyak happened after the election, in December. No such coordination was established by the probe, the Mueller probe, which concluded more than 2 years later under then special counsel Robert Mueller. No collusion. Sullivan is trying to rewrite history here. Powell argued that whatever Flynn told Pence and others in the transition team was none of the FBI's business. Quote, the executive branch has different reasons for saying different things publicly and privately, and not everyone is told the details of every conversation, end quote. Quote again from Sidney, if the FBI is charged with investigating discrepancies in statements made by government officials to the public, the entirety of its resources would be consumed in a week, end quote. Powell said Flynn's answers to the agents weren't material, meaning relevant to the FBI investigation of election meddling. How is it relevant to election meddling if he had the conversation with the Russian ambassador over a month after the election occurred? How is that election meddling? It happened after the election. Well, not according to Sullivan. Sullivan, however, thought otherwise, using a broader description of the investigation. The Bureau, he said, probed the, quote, nature of any links between individuals associated with the Trump campaign and Russia, and what Flynn said was material to it. The conversation with Kislyak happened a month and a half after the election. How can that be election meddling? Judge Sullivan, you got some splaining to do, buddy. The description Sullivan used appears to omit the context of the probe, which focused specifically on Russian election meddling. Look, the judge's decision was 99 pages, and I'm not going to take you through 99 pages, but I want to give you some highlights, lowlights. Look, I read the 99 pages, top to bottom, about Judge Sullivan's opinion on providing exculpatory evidence that shows General Flynn is innocent, to General Flynn and Sidney Powell. And the bottom line is, the judge could have upheld the rule of law. Instead, Judge Sullivan upheld a political hit job on General Flynn. The judge essentially ruled that General Flynn's prior plea agreement negates him, the court, providing that evidence to General Flynn and his attorneys, led by Sidney Powell. I want to take you through a couple statements.